go. Trying to bite my headache.
Put them on right. Ready? So in this video, for Module 4, I want to talk about, with Laura Thompson again, who we talked with about enrollment in Module 3. This time I'm going to hit a couple different topics that are issues that we want to discuss in Module 4. One being homelessness. The next would be to talk a little bit about foster care. And then we're going to touch on non-residents, and then we're going to touch on kinship care. And so all of those categories are elements and situations that you become involved in as a PPW. Okay? Welcome again, I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And so we'll just go ahead and dive right into it. Okay? Connected to the McKinney-Vento Act, which is the Federal Homeless Act. Can you talk a little bit about the most important aspects of identifying students as homeless and the role of PPW in that whole process?
Okay, so the McKinney-Vento Act has a very specific definition of homelessness, and it's basically a guiding question. Is this a school-aged child that is lacking a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence? And so there are a number of ways to look at that. When you're talking about fixed, is the child in a consistent location, or are they bouncing around from home to home without a stable house? Is it adequate, meaning is it a place that we would normally think of a human residing? Certainly a public location such as a bus station, a park, unless you're intentionally in a trailer that's intended to be there.
Parking lot.
A car, right. Those are not what we'd consider adequate housing. Or even it could be, a place that doesn't have adequate electricity, plumbing, etc., that you wouldn't think is a safe place for a student to be. So approaching it from both a fixed location and an adequate location, we want to make sure that we're catching students that are not in those kinds of situations. If they are, and let me add also shelter locations. When we're looking at, is a student in a shelter due to lack of housing, or even a domestic violence shelter due to safety reasons, that would fall under McKinney-Vento. And as well as doubled up. There are different definitions of homelessness that some agencies have to follow, but the school system can include students. By doubled up, we mean a family is intentionally, or it's not a choice because of wanting to save money. They're having to live with someone else because they have no other option. Mm-hmm. So they're able to document that they live in a home, but it may not be their home. Maybe they've lost their home and can't afford their own home. So all of those things are included in the definition. And then the PPW role is to help identify students, obviously, in that type of situation, to meet with parents, kind of go through some questionnaires about what their situation is, what their needs are. And the PPW role is basically to case manage at the school level those students, what their needs are educationally. Do they need school supplies? Are they in need perhaps of clothing? Are there things that the household could use? Parents may need resources in the community. Sometimes we can't solve the housing issue, but we can certainly connect them to agencies that can support them. And so the PPW is very familiar with a lot of those agencies locally that we can connect families to, and to the shelter contacts. So our role is to identify and also facilitate school needs, school enrollment, continue services, and continue transportation for students. And that may come up as one of the later questions, but making sure students have a means to continue in their current school if that's most feasible, or transfer to another school if that's in their best interest.
And connected to that question, just from my experience, you have to at least once a month log in your paperwork that you have talked with, discussed at those teaming meetings, the needs of the homeless population in a specific school, and or any outreach you did on behalf of the family. Now, you will find in a lot of the homeless situations that maintaining contact can be difficult because numbers change, or they move and they don't tell you, or they are all about staying connected while the services are being provided, but sometimes they just kind of almost drop off the face of the earth, and you spend, especially in the summertime, a good bit of time just locating some families about school enrollment for the following year and any current needs, because at the end of a student is only homeless for one school year, and over the summer you need to re-qualify them under that provision, and so that's my experience. But making sure that documentation is done, and I will post up the form that we use in Carroll County about the homeless and how we document our efforts to try to help. Let's move to number 2. What is the essential role? So part of the McKinney-Vento is that every county has to have a homeless liaison.
Yes.
And so I know in the past you have been that person.
I was for about a year, and another one of our coworkers recently assumed that role. Mm-hmm. So I do have some experience that I could speak to that. So yes, each county has to identify a local liaison who basically charges, in this case, the PPWs in our school system, with working with the schools and families to support those families who may be homeless. So the liaison has a number of roles. It's to help share information from the state level to the local level, making sure that PPWs are kept apprised of any law changes or efforts to support the homeless families. We're needing to monitor and comply with state laws and regulations. There are annual reports that we need to submit, data reports that go in with all of our regular, we talked a little bit before about records. One of the components is tracking the homeless families and some of their demographic information, who's coming and going, how many kids are classified as homeless, because some of our funding is based on that. Also, the role would be to make sure that PPWs are aware of resources in the community and that the liaison is going to some of those local meetings with other agencies. We have what's called in our county a Circle of Caring, and that organization now meets every other month, and there are representatives from a variety of Carroll County agencies, from the Bureau of Housing, Youth Service Bureau, DSS, Access Carroll, Health Department. I know I'm missing many, but all of those have representatives, school system included, come together and talk about some of the issues the community is facing. So we learn a lot, the liaison can learn a lot about what's going on in the community and also bring that back to the school system and share numbers back to that group with what we're seeing in the school system. So the role basically linking the community and the school system to resources, sharing data with the state, and keeping PPWs apprised of any law or policy changes so that we can properly serve families.
And maybe connect to that, maybe you've already answered this one, what reports do we have to send to the state? Just demographic, can we send it every year? Is it due by a certain time of the year?
Good question. So there are a couple things that, PPWs every year, as you mentioned, there's the forms that we document for each family, and we keep those for a couple of school years because we are audited by the State Department every other year. So they'll send a representative out, and they have a toolkit that they use basically that asks different questions about how we're monitoring homeless families, what documentation we're providing to show what we've done for families, and we present that whole report or documentation to them every other year. But within a given school year, along with all of our enrollment counts, the students who are homeless are flagged in our computer system, and so their information goes through the state. We tend to keep track electronically of what is the child's homeless status, like were they in shelter, or were they doubled up, or were they in another kind of housing situation. We keep track additionally of their ethnicity, whether they are receiving free reduced meals, which all homeless students are eligible, so they should be. special education services? Are they English language learners? So all of those things are broken down and analyzed by the state with our homeless population, as well as attendance. What you'll see often, as you mentioned, homeless families are very transient. It is a challenge to help those kids get to school regularly, and so we're always looking to try to improve attendance for those kids that are
Yep.
most at risk.
Yep. And so, you know, the work that you do with those homeless families, you know, all of it matters, not only just for the kids and for the families, but for the system. And so that's why it's important to have accurate records and be organized in your efforts. You know, sometimes you can handwrite on these reports, and now we've moved to a PDF kind of form so that it's typed and it's clear about, you know, what intervention was done or what kind of contact was made. It's just a little cleaner in that way. So moving on, let's talk a little bit about the Carroll County Public Schools and our connections to agencies in the system, in the community, and how that helps support families in the county. And also, maybe even in this one, we talk a little bit about the homeless count that we do and how we partner with them to.
Gotcha. Okay. So, part of, as I mentioned, the state is looking for each county to have a continuum of care. Not to be confused with the circle of caring, which has the same initials, but essentially the circle of caring is our continuum of care, if I had to summarize it. That is where all of the county agencies are coming together to service the homeless families in our community. We work very closely with human services programs because that is the organization that oversees the shelters within Carroll County, aside from the domestic violence shelter, which is under Family and Children's Services. So while we do work with Family and Children's Services, Human Services Programs is our biggie. They not only oversee the shelters, but they're our go-to for energy assistance, rental assistance, vouchers. They can kind of link families with even landlords that can have affordable housing. And those shelters know when kids are coming in. They have a list of the PPWs and the phone numbers so that they can reach out to us and let us know, hey, this family just arrived here. They're going to need a determination of whether they're staying in their current school and we line up busing for them, or are we transferring them to a local school within that district. So they are very much linked with the PPWs in supporting those families. The Circle also, the Housing Bureau, has an annual, as you referenced, a point-in-time survey. And this is an every other year count of homeless families in Carroll County. Their count is more limited than our McKinney-Vento definition in that they are only looking to identify those in shelters or in situations that are not habitable. So what they can't count are the doubled up families. So although we can identify families as doubled up, that's not what they're looking for in that particular survey. But essentially it's a survey where we go out into the community, find those families that are in those situations. PPWs may already know. Obviously we're tracking those families. We can call those families and offer the survey. Each parent can do a survey once. So if they've already done it, they'll just tell us, we've already done it, thank you. But it's a given day, a point in time where we do that survey countywide to get feedback on what those families' needs are and try to better service them. The past few years, alternating with that year of survey, we've also done what's called Maryland Youth Reach Count, and that is for unaccompanied homeless youth. And that can be any youth up to age 24. So some of those children are school age. We have a number of teenagers who are unfortunately in situations where they're not with their parents. They're maybe moving around, living with friends, crashing with relatives. And so those students can take a survey about their needs and their situation. And even students who are out of school, as I said, up to age 24, that are out in the community, we can survey those. So it's a kind of catching every other year of our youth and families with those surveys.
And so I think that's one piece that you need to understand. The school system works hand in hand with other community agencies because it's not just about the school population, it's also being an outreach. The school system's really an outreach, another arm of all those community agencies, at least student services wise, because we try to be a part of a bigger net to try to help
Yes.
as many
And
families.
you know what, I neglected to, there's a couple other agencies I just wanted to point out. In my time as being the liaison, folks are wonderful. Like Youth Service Bureau started a couple years ago, a disconnected youth program, working in conjunction with some of the other agencies. And they're trying to also capture those students who are no longer in school, but maybe haven't earned a diploma yet. Trying to get them some GED prep and classes and also get them on their feet. You know, what is the reason that they're maybe not in school but aren't employed? They're kind of stuck in an in-between land. And so we have a couple representatives of PPWs that go to those meetings and report back to us on some of the services that are available. And representatives from the health department have also been wonderful in communicating to me. If they might be out at a cafe, let's say, in town, and they hear rumblings from staff members that say, hey, this child is frequently coming in and talking about their home situation. Can somebody look into this? Make sure they're in school. Are they getting the supports they need? So it's really a nice, close-knit county that, you know, we hear things and we're trying to take care of our kids. And so I appreciate when sometimes other folks from other agencies actually call and will share a personal story and say, hey, this child is out at this location saying this, can we look into this? So that's a wonderful benefit of being in Carroll County Public Schools.
And I would say that sometimes in these homeless situations, that's how you find out. You'll get a phone call, sometimes anonymous. Sometimes you'll get emails from teachers that a kindergarten student is saying that, you know, they're staying in a hotel, or they didn't have food, or they didn't have, the electricity got shut off. And then you kind of step in and try to make the phone call to make contact about, again, PPW is the biggest role I feel sometimes is it's about clarity, what's really happening, and what can we do to try to help. I do want to talk about one other thing connected to homeless. That's not a question here, but I know we can talk about it. And I highlighted it in the narrated PowerPoint that I put up. This best interest idea.
Yes.
And so just maybe talk about your experience with best interest. I know I highlighted it in the PowerPoint, some of the things you have to consider, whether the sibling is also at the school, the amount of distance that the kids have to travel based on their age, their expectation for next year, stuff like that.
Right.
And maybe you want to talk about your experience.
And I think in many cases the PPW can resolve those issues directly with the family. But our goal is always to look, as you mentioned, it's very simple. What is the best interest of the student that becomes homeless? Is it to stay in the school that they've been attending with as minimal disruption as possible? Or realistically, are we looking at this child is now located at the other end of the county, 30 to 45 minutes away? Is it in the best interest of a kindergartner to be on a bus ride that may have to take multiple tiers of busing to get there and be a 2-hour bus ride? Is that in the best interest of that child? So, you know, whenever possible, I think our default is to try to keep a child in their current school, but it's not always feasible. Because we do want to look at the health and safety and well-being of a child. So we always are having those conversations with parents, many times informally. It's often easy to resolve, but there are times that the homeless liaison may have to step in and meet with the family and a PPW and ultimately give a decision by the school system, in which case a parent can appeal. There's always a means to appeal. They can appeal to the state representatives to say, you know, I want to question this decision about what we're doing for our child. Very rare that it gets to that. I think in most cases PPWs are always, you know, looking to do what they can to support families, and I think in most cases families are pretty reasonable in what they know can be done.
And I think too, if you have built that relationship there, you're better suited, they're better suited to listen to you and listen to reason about you know, transferring a kid to another school. In the long run is probably better, and they're more inclined to hear you, because you're the key person that has the relationship with the family. So these are the things that we consider with homeless populations, and you'll spend a good part of your time in a given year kind of working with those families. And so I just wanted to kind of wrap up this little segment of just the homeless, and can use that information to answer those discussion board questions and scenarios. Thank you so much.